Thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you for all being here. As named, I'm Kirsten Land, president of our Sonoma County Santa Rosa branch of the NAACP. Really thrilled that this project we've been dreaming of has come to fruition, and that we've had an amazing partnership with Scholar and students to take this on and really pursue some of the findings that we know that exist in the rich history of our county. Today, I'm really thrilled to share a little bit about our speakers that are going to be participating in the program, thanks to those who are joining us online. And of course, a recording of this will be made available to everyone after the event. Amy Kittelstrom is the director for the Santa Rosa Sonoma County Slavery Historical Research Project and is a professor of history at Sonoma State University and the author of The Religion of Democracy and other publications. She's a specialist in modern thought and culture, and is currently writing a deep intellectual history of James Baldwin. Medrano, a researcher on this project, is a student in anthropology at Sonoma State University. Growing up queer and Afro-Latino, Medrano has lived in. He believes in projects like this one to tackle the intersections of race, power, and politics. Mama Chan is a second-year student at Sonoma State University, working to earn her bachelor's degree in history. Her interests usually take her outdoors, but the summer has been spent working with us in this project in Sonoma County on the Historical and Genealogy Library, working on the Slavery Historical Research Project. Here, she has spent many hours researching original documents and transcribing to do her part on the project. And she hopes to use this experience as a jumpstart to her history journey, and one day can guide young high school students as a high school history teacher. We're grateful for the trilogy of partnerships through our three organizations and interests of our students. And I'm going to turn it over to you to share, because this is about your work and what you've done, and we're just really grateful that you've taken this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, the absent Director Smith, who might be on the Zoom, but who had for years been pursuing the fact that there is a hidden history here involving enslavement in Sonoma County. And she made the initial contact with Meredith Wiseman of the Center for Community Engagement at Sonoma State University, who then contacted the history department. And I was just thrilled to learn that there was history right here in the county, right here in its archives, like right away from my home, that were not just worth my time, but worth all of our time, worth all of our attention. So I'm really grateful to the NAACP, to the support we've received from Sonoma State University, to the archivists, to so many people in the county who expressed interest and support in this project. And I just really want to emphasize at the outset that we're in a public space, right? We're in a public library. I'm also supported by the public at Sonoma State University. Public has been shrinking in this country since the passage of civil rights legislation in the 60s. Right? We've had a privatization of America in order to restrict goods to the few. Okay, and so here we are in this public space that is accessible and inclusive, right? And where we are forming a kind of public we, right? And I believe that by the interest shown in this project and the support for this project, that the we that is forming through this work is a we that really wants to face the truth of the American past, right? And so that's what we're doing today. The students will talk about the research we've done this summer, but I wanted just to say something at the beginning to put it in historical context, because I imagine it's been a little while since some people here took a history class. Okay, so to put it in the California history, American history, and what's really colonial history. The history of America is a history of colonialism. It's a history of peoples taking over lands and peoples and exploiting both, right? And so where California fits in this history is important because we're correcting that record with this research. Okay, so as you know, California was claimed by Spain in the conquest. So it was New Spain, it was part of New Spain. And they established a system of domination over the native peoples that involved missions, right? And then those people inside the missions were forcibly converted or forced to labor, right? Forced to change their names, right? Dispossessed and not. Okay, so that was in place sparsely around California, right? There was a lot of unconquered California space during the New Spain era. And then when Mexico gained its independence in 1821, that system effectively continued. But again, not thick kind of a settlement, so-called settlement, right? So now enter the USA with the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 48. This is a war of conquest. This is a powerful Democratic Party that believes in that might makes right. Okay, that is why they forced the Cherokee and other civilized tribes on the Trail of Tears in 1838, for example. Right? And it is why when they saw the opportunity to expand the United States nation into the Southwest, including California, they took it with that war. Now, there was opposition to the war among some Whigs. So at that time, the two major parties were the Democrats and the Whigs. The Whigs had a lot of trouble getting national office or getting a majority in Congress. So effectively, the Democrats guided U.S. policy, but the Whigs had some power. And it's useful to learn about a proviso attached to the congressional authorization of the Mexican-American War. It's called the Wilmot Proviso. It's named after David Wilmot, who submitted it. Now, the proviso failed, okay? But it's still important to know about it because what he tried to attach to that authorization was the prohibition of the expansion of slavery into the territories that might be acquired by this war, okay? Wilmot was a Whig. He was also what was called a free soiler, okay? So this is just to understand the politics of the time, meaning he wanted any future American territories to exclude slavery. Why? Was he a humanitarian? No. Because he wanted white men to expand into those territories, okay? He did not want free white men to compete with unfree Black labor, okay? So that brings us to 1849, if somebody here knows what happened in 1849, who knows? Okay, and so that means Americans rushing westward, right, to get rich. And this puts pressure on Congress to add California in the Compromise of 1850 the next year. Now, the Compromise of 1850 was supposed to heal the Union over this divisive issue of slavery, right? And so Daniel Webster, a Whig, Henry Clay, a Democrat, a Northerner, a Southerner, one who believed in free labor and one who believed in slave labor, right? Shook hands on this deal that actually just made the clock tick that much faster toward the Civil War. Nobody was happy. Okay, but one of the provisions of the Compromise of 1850 was the addition of California to the United States as a free state, which tips the balance in Congress toward those who are anti-slavery only in the sense that they want to prevent the further expansion of slavery. They're not abolitionists who want to end slavery. They don't really care about the slaves already existing in the South. They just want them to stay there, right? And so that is, I think, the necessary preface to understanding what we find, because our research essentially begins in 1850 and moves through 1860. Well, actually, yeah, but there's so much more research to be done. But this is the moment, I think, when I can pass it over to Juliana first.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Juliana Chan. I am a student at Sonoma State University, as mentioned. I do study history. As of right now, I work in Rankin Valley School District and I work with second and third graders. And every day I see them. And I know that everything I did here today was for them. I will hope to be a teacher. Thank you online, just like you do here, you guys today. So thank you all for being here. I moved to Sonoma County because I mean you guys got beautiful oceans. But also I have deep roots here. I'm Homo Native American from the Cloverdale tribe. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Thank you. My mother is from the tribe, and I've grown up coming out here, going to Thanksgiving ceremonies, dancing, learning my religion, my culture, spending time with people. And being here today, I get to share stories about ancestors that I got to learn about. So first I'll explain to you guys a story of a man named Samuel Shattuck. Samuel Shattuck was also known as Sam C. He was a slave. He came from Louisiana and he was moved on over here to California with a man named Shattuck. This was David O. Shattuck. He brought Sam Shattuck with him. And we don't know much about Sam's time over here. I did some research. I wasn't able to find much on him, but we were able to get an emancipation record from the due to some help from the NAACP. We sent us over this. It's over there in that big book, big blue book. I got to spend the week reading it. Because let me tell you, 1852 writing is nothing like a nicely typed document. But I was able to type it up, so if any of you guys want to read over there, there's a translation of it. With Kittelstrom help, trust me, I needed a lot. But basically, in the within the document, it just expresses that introduces the emancipation of the man by the county clerk, who was I think his name is John Henley. He was the witness, and then the county clerk would have been John Henley as well. He was the reporter. So just you can read it yourself. The document just explains how by the state of California, this was on April 21st, 1852, signed completely everything that day. He was emancipated. There's a description of him, and I can go ahead and read that for you guys. It says description: Sam or Samuel Shattuck, full-blooded black, about 55 years old, about 5 feet 11 inches high, straight build, rather spare, and weighing about 160 pounds. This is what we've got about him. That's all I know. But at the end, he's emancipated. He is known as a free man, and he was able to live his life through his free will. And I think that I wanted to share that story with you guys here today because it's a full circle. The man, he was enslaved. I have no idea what had happened to him there. But I know that he came to California and he was emancipated and able to live his life. And happily, I had some time to go to the 1852 census, and I found him under Sam Shattuck, a free man. So that was, I mean, if we can all give a round of applause for Sam Shattuck. I mean, that was pretty hard for me to hear that story because it made aware to me that this was real. But what I was doing though was important. So I kept going. I went through the 1852 census and I was taking every person that I could find that was labeled under Indian, mulatto, black, or Spanish. These were the names that this was the categories, there you go, of the people. And I found a lot of Indians, many Native Americans that I most likely was from Sonoma County, most likely were Pomo or Miwok or one of the others. And they were found in groups. This was confusing to me when I first noticed this because I was finding them grouped together, but at that time there was no real I had no answer. So I was looking through and I remembered that due to a paper that Kittelstrom gave me in the news, the New York Review, there was, it referred to the California state legislation in 1850 that went on to 1865. And it was a protection of Indians. And I use quotations mostly because they were pushed into servitude. And I don't know if you've ever heard the quote, but it's take the savage out of them. That's basically what was going on, is they were domesticating them, but it was taking their culture away from them, who they really were. And as a Native American young little girl out here, that's what I plan to do, is make my way and bring stories and tell everyone that the culture is still strong. No matter what people did and took away from them, they still exist. And here I am today, and I stand here speaking for my ancestors. And there's also some findings of many unanswered questions we've had so far, because the research will continue. I want to explain that this will keep going, hopefully. And I found names of young children. I have an example of Rosetta, and he was a 12-year-old servant found under the Finch family, which
He's probably talking about.
exactly. And then there was another boy named Juan. Juan's name was spelled W-H-A-N. Not in the census. There were many names found like that. I found Jose was H-O-S-A. I've got just a few different ones. And you can tell that maybe the census taker either didn't have any knowledge of how to spell it, or were these names not, was there no spellings at the time? These are all questions I still have. But another one was Juan was an 8-year-old cook. He was a boy. And then there is Fanny, who was a 12-year-old girl, and she was also a cook. And she was found alone within a white family. So seeing that she wasn't found amongst the other Native Americans, I can assume that she was taken from her family at a young age and given to another family to take the savage out of her. I had an extraordinary time explaining this to you guys, and being able to work on the project has been so enriching to me. So thank you for being here. That's what it's good.
Which the pretense of civilizing the savage, it's a pretense of colonialism. We're doing good. Yeah, but we have to name exploitation, right? Exploitation of labor and sexual exploitation, okay, is the bottom line. Slavery is coercion. It is, right? So, yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Hi guys, my name is Jeremy. So I initially joined this project because I had an interest in reparations specifically.
Could you put the microphone closer to your mouth?
This better? Yeah. Cool. So my name is Jeremy. I'm an Afro-Latino from Los Angeles. And the initial reason why I joined this project was my interest in reparations, especially learning about a family in Southern California that had received their land back. I was interested in seeing what we could do to continue this process of reparations. And in any way I could help, I wanted to, and this project was the perfect way to do that. So first, I kind of want to talk to you guys a little bit about what the research process looked like, and just tell you what I guess I learned from it. So the Finch family, which Juliana brought up earlier, was the family that I decided to kind of dive into a little bit. And what initially brought my interest in the family was the 3 children that they had in their household, or that we thought they had in their household. Their names were Rentasa, Malepa, and Juan. The thing about the 1852 census is that it didn't mark which people were part of which household, so we couldn't assume that these children were actually part of the Finch family. So that kind of dispersed my interest in the family for a little bit, until we started looking through the 1860 census. So the thing about the 1860 census is that it does mark who lives in whose household. So we can definitively say who lived in which family's household. And in the 1860 census, we found William Bitch. a man who had 2 Indian children in his household named Teresa and William West. So with this in mind, and knowing that they were in the same household, it was likely that these children were bound to William Fitch. After this, my interest in the family sparked again, and I wanted to know if William Fitch had any relation to the family we'd seen in the 1852 census, Josephine Fitch and all her children. So what I initially did was I searched for Josephine through the Sonoma Library's digital collection. And thankfully, I found a book, which you guys can see over here later on, that contained information about the entire family, which was amazing. I was very happy to find that book. And using that book and using the family search website, which you can find on Sonoma County Library's website, I was able to cross-reference these two. And I found Henry Delano Fitch, which was William Fitch's father, and Josefa Fitch, which was Josephine, which was also William Fitch's mother. And so I was able to kind of confirm that William Fitch was related to Josephine Fitch in the 1852 census. After finishing up that cross-checking, I was able to trace William Fitch all the way to 1943 with Lola Dolores Duarte, who was John Duarte's sister, actually, that was incorrect. And in John Duarte's description in the family search, we can actually see a census that shows William Fitch in his household in Mendocino County. So unfortunately, because this family had moved out of Sonoma County into Mendocino County, I had to end my research there because there was no more really of a trail for me to follow. And even though the Fitch family was a dead end, it was a great way for me to gain experience on how kind of the research process works. And we were able to cross off one name from the hundreds of names that we have to look through in the census. And so even though it was a dead end, it was a great job. So next, I kind of wanted to talk about the categories that we used for marking people as either bound or unbound. During this project, as we recorded information from the census, one of the categories we decided to fill out was people with likely status. In other words, whether they were enslaved or freed. Now, throughout the project, I struggled trying to figure out whether to mark people as bound or unbound, because it was causing me, just stirring up a whole bunch of questions in my mind that I just could not find the answers to. These questions were, what can we consider enslaved, and how can we accurately pinpoint those that were enslaved and those that weren't? Now, there were some obvious cases of enslavement in the censuses, like Jacob Graham, who was a 16-year-old Black teenager that was marketed explicitly as a slave in the 1860 census. So him, we could absolutely say was enslaved because it said it specifically in the census. But then there were some more confusing people who we couldn't really tell. It was very unclear if they were bound or unbound. One of those was Juan, a 40-year-old Indian man whose occupation was cook, but he had no last name, and he was placed in the census next to two 12-year-old indigenous boys who were marked as servant boys. So how can we figure out if Juan was actually free or if he was bound? And I struggled with this a lot. Now, one thing to understand is that in the late 1800s, the typical enslavement that we think of or that we learn about in school still existed in many places. But in other places, it had been adjusted and transformed into forms of enslavement that were much more subtle and hidden. There were people who, because they had no prospects, no money, and nothing to their names, were forced to stay with their captors and work positions such as farmer or laborer with wages that were nearly non-existent, or just housing and food and no money at all. So in deciding if people were bound or free, I kind of learned that enslavement can look like a lot of different things and not just the typical enslavement that we learned about in school. I learned that it can look like marginalized groups like Black people, Indigenous people, women, or children who had no other choice but to either start working for free or continue working for free with their captors. I learned that it can look like people whose life circumstances did not allow them to live independently and thus were forced into positions that they would not have chosen otherwise. I also learned that there really isn't any way to pinpoint those who were enslaved and those who weren't, apart from the few obvious ones that I mentioned earlier. In the end, I think my biggest takeaway of this part of the whole process was that you really have to think critically about each individual on the census and whether or not to mark them as bound or unbound. And more specifically and more importantly, if you're unsure and you don't know whether to mark them as unbound or unbound, you just mark them as unclear or unsure because it's better to tell the truth and make it known that you're unsure instead of just assuming things without any facts to back it up. Okay, so I'm basically just gonna end with letting you guys know that exploring the enslavement of Black and Indigenous people and other people of color in Sonoma County has been a surreal and sobering experience to me. In doing so, I've come to understand the situation in California and many other free states and understand that this situation was much more complex and convoluted than meets the eye. Of the multitude of things that I've learned throughout this project, the most profound has been in realizing that no matter where Black, Indigenous, and other people of color went in this country, they faced and still face oppression, racism, and violence. Despite this, they persevered and they continue to persevere. People like John Richards, a 35-year-old Black man who funded the first colored school in Santa Rosa out of his own pocket. People like him created a space for community, coalition, and thus perseverance of Black and Indigenous communities. In applying for this project, I was asked to state why I wanted to help. One thing I remember writing was that in order to create a just and equitable future, we must rectify our past. After going through this entire summer and having this amazing experience, I stand by that statement. And my belief in the need and the importance of reparations has been strengthened even further. Thank you.
Generalization about our findings off of what Jeremy was saying. He's absolutely right that unclear was something we had to enter often, and indeterminacy is a finding, you know, and so keep going. But just to say that there a couple of models, right? I think it was a bit of a surprise to us to find that there was much more Native enslavement than there was Black enslavement in the county, because a lot of white Southerners moving to the county in this era, and it seems like they would just buy some natives from the Spanish or Mexican who were leaving, right? Because they had the Spanish names and they were messed up. So it's very common, like these examples that are already cited, but it was also just really disturbingly common to find something like a 25 or 30-year-old laborer living with a 12-year-old native girl. Okay. She has no choice. She has to stay. And the reason she's there is because her tribe has been massacred by U.S. soldiers. Right? And then the other model, like Jeremy was saying, it's not the sort of plantation style agriculture that you have in the U.S. South, because the white Southerners who came here couldn't bring that many people because they weren't that wealthy. They would come from Florida, stop off in Missouri and buy somebody. Often a girl they would rape so they could start reproducing right away, you see? And then they would try to establish their household with this forced labor in it. And those people had no recourse, okay? And to add one more thing is just for context, the 1857 Dred Scott case. And like Jeremy was just saying, not just California, but other so-called free states tolerated enslavement within their borders. And the US Supreme Court said that the Black man has no rights, that the whites are bound to respect, okay? And so that's how we get so like on the brink of civil war and how California's. Go ahead, Juliana, another example.
Hello, back to me. And basically I just wanted to finish off explaining the techniques that I gained from doing this research project this summer. I was able to learn how to read really hard writing for me, thank you too. But it was all rewarding in the end because I can understand how people use cursive a lot differently. Other than that, it's been amazing being able to give back to my ancestors, like you said, and being here with you guys in the committee. During the census, I did have to identify a lot of people, a lot of things I didn't want to see, but I still went forth with my study, and I would group these Native Americans, and I would sit back for a few hours at a time, collecting the names. I wanted to make it clear that when I got to Native Americans, there were usually only last names mentioned, no first names. I did have a time when the last name was Timothy, but the first name was first. And then kept going down and I saw second Timothy, I keep going, third Timothy. Take away from that, what I assumed was that there was less communication between the tribes and the census takers. That's what we needed. Other than that, I was able to go ahead and categorize everyone. The categories we used for when we had a spreadsheet, we would take the census and we would take every category from there and put it into our own spreadsheet, which is available. It has age, color, sex, place of birth, occupation, and most of the time, like I said, last name was just included. This helped me be able to tell where these people were coming from. Most likely California was where all the indigenous people were coming from. We had a few, I think it was mulattoes from Virginia, am I right? Yeah.
Well, again, the typical model would be that the Black slave came from Virginia, and then the mulattoes are produced by the sexual exploitation.
And they would still be labeled under California's place of birth. So that gives you a little bit of an oversight. Other than that, I had an amazing time being able to sit down. I've read a ton of beautiful books that I think we have available here today, and I hope you guys all check it out. And thank you for being here. Yeah.
Hey, Juliana, it was a really amazing experience, and I learned a lot of things that I did not know before. I learned about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, that basically meant coming to California did not always mean freedom for many Black folk, and they still had to fight for their freedom in court, and unfortunately, a lot of them did lose. I learned about the blatant enslavement of indigenous children through government-facilitated policies such as the 1850 Act, or the government and protection of Indians. They basically allowed indigenous children to be taken from their home and placed in white homes as servants. I don't think I would have learned any of this if I didn't join this project. And I'm just really happy that I've been able to participate in this and gain all this information. And also, really quick, if you guys head over there and want to look at everything over there, there is one really interesting case of an Indian man named, what was his name again? Domingo, who in the 1852 census was marked as Black, but when you look over at the 1860 census, they had corrected it to Asian. So it just kind of, he's from Calcutta. Yeah, he's from Calcutta, but in the 1860 census, they marked him from Bombay. Yeah, so it's really just looking at stuff like that just gives you more and more questions, and like there's more I want to learn, and just thank you guys for having me. Yeah.
Questions. I understand there were some circulating around.
Yes, if you have a question, please pull up your note card. I'll collect them and we'll take some questions from the audience.
Oh, God.
Okay. We have until 2:00.
Okay, sorry, I had to read it first. Besides census data, what other primary source materials did you guys examine? So besides census data, we honestly, the history and genealogy library was like a big part of this. Like the employees were amazing at the history and genealogy library, and they told us the digital library, which is basically an online database where you can search for records of people living in Sonoma County. Think of it as like Google for the history of Sonoma County. So a lot of the names in the census, we would take them from the census and put them into that first. And whatever information came up, we would then go to the history and genealogy library and have them pull up any books or records that they could for us.
We also use things like a coroner's inquest at one point. We tried to get a probate record, I think, which did go through at one time. So we were able to use other things like books, ebooks that we found through the library. So the library has been an amazing help in all of this. So thank you so much.
Next question. Can you clarify William Fitch? Was he enslaved or Native American? Yeah, I was really nervous, so I was kind of going all over the place at that point. But basically, William Fitch was a white man who was the son of Josephine Fitch, who had come up in the 1852 census. Thank you. And he was basically in the 1862 census by himself without the rest of the family. And he was the head of the household that contained 2 indigenous children, Teresa and William West, who were likely bound to him. And that's the clarification.
Let me just do it real quick here. There are 2 that are overlapping, and I just do want to clarify. Well, I can go with 3. In California, was there a distinction between slavery, chattel slavery, and indenture timed contract? Indentures had really gone out by 1850. And so the fact is that there was slavery. Most of it was hidden in the sense that there's only one that were said slave, but it was hidden in plain sight. Okay, and so then these 2 related questions. One is, can you look up white people migrating from other states to California and find if they brought Black slaves with them? And is there much documentation of Southern slave owners bringing their slaves to California? How legal or not was that? And so, yes, this is what we've documented, is white Southerners going from Florida that might have a stop in Virginia, or they might bring them all the way from Florida. You can tell by looking at the in the census, it says the property owner where they're from, and then everybody else where they're from. And so sometimes the Black member of the household, or 2 or 3 members, would be from the same state as the person whose last name they had. This is the clue. They have that name. Who gave them that name? Same as Shattuck. Shattuck, Samuel. Right. So you know that they were enslaved and they were brought here forcibly. How legal was it? Well, it wasn't legal. However, it was tolerated. Right? It was effectively legal, right? And then there was something else on do we have the percentage of households? And that's just work that we haven't done yet. That's data crunching, and we're not at that phase yet. But I will say it was a relatively low percentage. What would you estimate? How many households had slaves in them? What percentage, Rob?
I would say, I thought it was a lot more. I thought it was like 30, 35.
Okay,
So I think in 1852, maybe more.
More,
Right? But by 1860, I'm just the majority of pages now.
1852, like I said, had a lot more of the Native Americans grouped together, which I assumed were tribes, but
But in 1852, it was hard. You couldn't tell whose household they were in. So that's why Jeremy was saying the 1860 census, you can see because there's a number given to the household. And so then when Black or Native members of that household are, then you figure they're probably not there voluntarily. But again, more research is required. Is this the Fitch family of Healdsburg?
Which family mentioned the Fish family of Healdsburg? And so just was it the grandparents? Right. Yes, I don't know who wrote this, but it's asking, was the Fish family mentioned the Fish family of Hillsburg? If so, Josefa Fitch of that family was the daughter of Maria Carrillo of Santa Rosa. Yes, that is correct. They, I think, owned Sonoma Ranch. And you can check the book over here that'll have all the info on the family. But yeah, and also on Family Search, which is another database that we use often, you can get that on Sonoma County Library's website. It showed Maria Carrillo of Santa Rosa as her mother. And it shows, that's how I found the family all the way up to 1943, because it shows people in the family all the way moving up all the way to that point. Pretty much.
All right, I have a question. Were any white people enslaved? No. With the census records, we weren't able to find any labeled or labeled under white.
And if I may expand on that, it's a pernicious rumor that white people were enslaved. Okay, there's a pernicious rumor that goes around Irish Americans were enslaved. They were mistreated. Okay, there are varieties of exploitation. Okay, but white people were not enslaved in the modern era of slavery. So just to add, right, race gets constructed through modern enslavement and colonialism, right? The root of the word slave is Slav, because indeed there were white, so-called white slaves, except they didn't think of themselves as white because nobody had invented whiteness yet. Okay, so modern slavery that involves the continent of Africa and the natives of the Americas evolves with colonialism. And people who get into the white category were never enslaved. And so again, that distinction within indentured servitude is useful. The indentured servant puts their X on the contract. The slave is forced onto the slave ship, and that's a crucial difference. I don't know that I can really answer that. This is about the Dred Scott decision and how, of course, it was voided. What is the latest evidence of slaves still held in California, meaning today? So modern human trafficking is really far outside our research. We're really focused on this early period. But there is a new book by Jean Pressler, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, California, a Slave State, that if you're curious about that, you can read that book because she puts it all in one frame and you know, explains that. So. Okay, so I don't know.
Can you repeat her name again?
Praetzler. That's okay.
You can request it through the library.
Yeah, so just to say one thing on that, right? So this is a newly published book, okay? There are a couple of other books that deal with the history of slavery in California, okay? None of them have researched Sonoma County. And so that's what's exciting about this, is that nobody's actually looked at these very documents. And so there's a question about where will this research go? Well, we'll see, because research it's murky. It's like you're just wandering through a tunnel, and we should go this passageway or not, right, like that. But it certainly is to substantiate these narratives. And to identify as much concrete specifics as we can, and then to see how did the patterns of enslavement in this county cohere with what was going on elsewhere in the state, and how was it different? Another aspect of it, so the next stage of the research is also working with the NAACP, with whom we have this partnership. How might these findings be useful to them and their mission, like Jeremy was saying, that's been from the foundation of the project, is the sense that today's justice depends on reckoning with the past.
Okay, so someone wrote, was there slavery in Santa Rosa? Where exactly are there historical remnants in Sonoma County we can now see? So I think we can all say there was slavery or enslaved people in Santa Rosa. Where exactly, we haven't really gotten to that point specifically. I do, in the research, I do know about the Wright family. I don't know if anybody here knows about them. Specifically, there is, I think, Davis or David Wright, who is in the Santa Rosa Post Cemetery, and his stone has it marked as colored boy. And we know that the Wright family owns some portion of land where Coffee Park is today. And we know that's pretty much all we kind of know about the family. They're kind of shrouded in a little bit of mystery. So that's why we didn't really get into them too much. But historic remnants in Sonoma County, we can now see. I would go look at Davis Wright's headstone at the rural Santa Rosa Cemetery, because it does say colored boy on there, and he's pretty famous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a great question of are there any structures in Sonoma County existing that were built by slaves? So no, because they came in small numbers. So the enslaved members of a household would be working alongside white laborers, right? And indigenous. There are Chinese laborers in the county, and we went into this project thinking we were going to find unfree Chinese, right? But it looked to me like they were paid laborers, right? And so again, so the African American members of a household would be there as servants, laborers, cooks, nannies.
And just to clarify this, we're only talking about 1850 and above. That's why we're not talking about the building of the missions and that and the missions people there.
Yeah.
Because that's before our research time.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
That would be the reason.
Yeah. But there's a question here of would the mission records be useful? And that's just the kind of historical thinking. Yeah, maybe they would. But as students learn, historical research takes a lot of time.
Yeah,
It takes a lot of, I mean, they've been at it, there's just, you can go on and on and on. And it's a matter of when we have that kind of support. Is there something with a hand up?
That's the thing how do I you don't have to. Oh, that's fair. That's good.
I can have. Okay.
All right, and a final question here is, was slavery ever glorified here? Kind of a hard question to answer, but what I can say off of it was that Santa Rosa was a big part of the Confederate side during the Civil War. So they were all for very slave states. They wanted to keep the Confederate side going over here. That's different from most of California, but it definitely does say it was something they need to add for.
Well, so just to understand the Confederacy, right? It is not true that the Confederacy broke away from the Union because Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans had any intention of ending slavery where it existed. They did not. They had no intention. It was very clear. They were going to let people in Virginia and Georgia and everywhere else continue to exploit African Americans. Okay, what they opposed was the further expansion of slavery. That wasn't good enough for the Confederacy because the Confederacy wanted to expand slavery. They wanted to expand it not only into the West, they wanted to colonize the Caribbean, Central America, and expand the slave empire. This is their vision, the slave empire, where the few get rich off the labor of the many, right? And so they absolutely glorified slavery. Slavery is our right. Right? Slavery is our God, slavery is our king. And if you look at the secession documents, which you can find online for the Confederate States, it's black and white, it's crystal clear, right? And so then what happened afterward is this mythic memory of the Civil War. Oh, it was just this tragic interlude in American history. It wasn't about slavery. I don't even know what it was about. It was just so tragic, and now it's over, kind of thing, right? And so that obfuscation of the actual causes of the Civil War, it really was Southern white nationalism. So that white nationalism involved slavery and racial hierarchy as something that they were convinced was the order of nature, divinely ordained, okay? And so, of course, those who glorified slavery and came here glorified it. But there's not, I mean, again, we haven't exhausted the historical record. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the census. There's no commentary in the census, you know, so we have so much we could do in newspapers and elsewhere to try to substantiate that.
Okay, so we have another one. Did you find former slave Mary Ellen Pleasant, who started Beltane Ranch and funded John Brown abolitionists, 1956 to 19 something? So we did kind of briefly find some info on Beltane Ranch. So yeah, it's very vague. And this is kind of outside of the time that we were looking at, because, you know, 1956 is way above.
Oh, that's just a mistake, it should be.
Oh, 1856, okay. But yeah, we didn't know anything about Mary Ellen Pleasant, which is why this is great to have, and also kind of a great part to bring up the fact that this, like we brought up earlier, is a public kind of event and a public research. So the more that we can get you guys to kind of give us some information or however you can, or just to talk to us, the more information that we can get and the more research we can get going on. Yes, next question.
All right, the question is there a tie with the genocide of natives with the state paying a bounty? I think are we talking about reparations here? Is it-
No, this is like the article. It's okay. So is there a tie with the genocide of natives with the state paying around? So yes, yes. And so I'm glad that genocide is the right term. Okay, and we've been very slow as a nation to acknowledge that and have yet to do really much about it. But I do want to point to Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland as somebody who's a very positive person in the first minute of the whole cabinet position. So there's a little bit of something good there. But in fact, in California, the history of massacres in California is much more severe than we've ever been told. We're talking about just open fire on Native communities, wiping out the adult population, taking the children and selling them. There was indeed a bounty system, bringing scalps to the government, okay? Oh, these are the civilized people, the white Californians, right? And getting rewarded for them. And so then that creates more vulnerable population, right? You've lost your elders, you've lost your leaders, right? And so then you have vulnerable, hungry, dependent people. Those are the type of people that are easiest to exploit.
And then I can also piggyback off of that because there was a Blood Island Massacre, which happened in Clear Lake. I don't know if you know about that one. It happened May 15th, 1850. It is the spring fresh spawn gathering. This is where the Native Americans would go and gather food for the spring. And settlers came over and wiped the entire tribe, completely gone. This was most likely the Pomo tribes because the Pomo tribe originated in Lake County. And then they were forced to move more towards the ocean. So when it's said that the Pomo are from the ocean, that was more towards later. They were forced moved over. Big Valley, Brown Valley, all those tribes, those were all Lake County tribes. Even Cloverdale was most likely a Lake County tribe that we are still facing that trailing that. What's it called? But yeah, so the Big Valley tribe was pretty much wiped out of the Blood Island Massacre.
Yes, so then when we're seeing the evidence in the census, and we see somebody categorized as Indian who only has one name, who's in the household of a white American family from Missouri, right? We don't know where they came from exactly. It says they came from California, but they could have been from a huge, there could be a huge range of origins for that person, right? But then they're caught up in this colonial system of exploitation that Americans profit off of.
Other questions?
Can you explain the distinction between servant and the slave? Might servant have been a euphemism for language for an enslaved person?
Yeah, pretty much, that's, if they mark them as a servant and they're in a household of a white family, and they're a Black or indigenous person, or even an Asian person, like the Indian man I mentioned earlier, most likely they were enslaved. There were some that they would mark as servant boy, and just to me, when you add boy at the end, it's like for sure, oh, you enslaved these people. So just mainly answer that question, yes. If they're marked as servant, they're more likely to have been found.
And also just to expand a bit on that, I mean, this euphemism isn't just in California, right? And it goes way back, right? Because there were indentured servants, right? And there were servants in Europe. And servants are for the upper class, and white Southerners thought of themselves as aristocratic, right? There was technically never an aristocracy in the United States, or what became the United States, because that got left behind. Nevertheless, there was an attempt by white Southerners to recreate themselves as an aristocracy, which depended on having this exploited laboring class. And so then those who worked in the home, waiting at table and all of that, got called servants often, right? Oh, this is my servant. They were still enslaved. And you can look all the way to the most vivid example for me is the 1852 novel by Harry Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, the best-selling novel of the 19th century in international influence. Also an abolitionist novel with minstrel humor. I mean, there's a lot of layers to this novel, right? But even this, written by somebody who was an abolitionist, who did have a humanitarian drive behind her wish to have slavery, and used this euphemism of servant, calling slaves servants. And so that indicates how widespread it was at the time. Nevertheless, we can't quite tell because there probably were some servants,
Yeah, that's it.
right, who were
Easy.
voluntary or semi-voluntary. And so again, it's just a matter of having to follow the trails.
And that's when we mark them as unclear or unsure, because we're not sure about a lot of them. Yeah. What do reparations look like in California? What do reparations look like in California? Very interesting question, very low. I could talk about this a lot, but so there is an example in Southern California of a family. I don't know the exact names of the family, but the Bruce family, yes, who received, I don't know how much it was in the million of land back from the state that was found to have been their family's land and was taken from them. So things like that, getting land back. Reparations can also look like free education all the way up into college for Black and Indigenous people and other people of color. Reparations, it takes a lot of forms, basically. There's no one way we should look at reparations. We should look at it in multiple different ways and look at it as a way to kind of deter the systemic oppression of Black Indigenous people.
Yeah, it's quite a moment for our country to be debating reparations at a time when on the national level it's politically impossible. But at the moment, but in California there are a lot of initiatives toward reparations, and San Francisco is involved in this, and so I don't think I can give a definitive description of all that because I didn't bring those kinds of notes along with me. But the hope has always been that this research would inform this advocacy for, and just reparations, repairing, right? We have unrepaired history in this country. And so are we willing to rectify the past is the question before the public. And
Which we need to do in order to move towards the future
yeah.
together.
I just want to add into what you just said, act. Was California a free state? If yes, yes. Yes, officially, it was, right? Were they able to capture slaves that were here and bring them back to wherever? I presume so, but again, I haven't pursued that history, so I can't tell you any specifics about it. But yeah, that's the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, that was part of the Compromise of 1850, beefed up the already existing Fugitive Slave Act. It was always illegal for enslaved peoples to run away from their so-called owners, right? White Southerners were so puzzled by how many slaves ran away that they named it drapetomania. Drapetomania, the inexplicable mania for self-emancipating. Why would they do that? It's a mental illness. Okay, but then with the 1850 beefing up of it, the two key components. One is that the party that believed in so-called small government authorized federal marshals to pursue into the free states. Okay, and then the other one, and this particularly bothered the consciences of the abolitionists where they existed, like in Boston, is that you were mandated to turn somebody in. You were committing a crime, right, if you didn't turn somebody in. Okay, and this is actually the model of the current Texas law criminalizing abortion, right? It took a page from, what's it?
No, you already said it.
Okay, all right, they took a page from the fugitive slave law, which tells you something, doesn't it? Right? And so this meant that there were no free states anymore. Really, that's what it meant. There were no free states because there was no place that somebody could be guaranteed their freedom. Do you want to speak?
I do. It's a book. It's called The History of the Daughters. And it starts on a woman who decided to take the crown on every other woman's territory. I don't know if you guys ever fallen back, but you guys have it here at the library. It's called The History of the Daughters. Definitely recommend it. You're following back to 1600s. 1600s all the way to the 1980s, 1900s, 1990s. It's a great book. I do recommend it. I personally have been reading it myself. I also have The True Story of the West, which is 12 books with pictures and evidence of human Native Americans slaughtered, and our children were taken away from us without authorization, stolen from us, with a lot of evidence that we still provided. Even when we got wed, they decided to murder our husbands in front of us, our wives in front of us, to grab them and take them as slaves. Not only that, they took advantage of us when we were sleeping, walked into our homes, to our tents, murdered our men, raped our men, and abused them multiple ways. I mean, what a way to describe a human being who's a Native American, to be free like the wind, or proud and joyful. Never did we ever take any thought of hurting you guys when you guys walked into these lands. We fed you and you bit our hands. That's how it is. You saw us with roofs on our heads and you call it to civilization to try to take it from us. Yeah, it's not like that because we gave. We never took from anybody else. We gave it to them. And then they still had the nerve to call the Apache tribe, to be known, to kill without killing and stealing without stealing. Yet they never had the nerve to take a risk and throw their dice and have faith in something they've never seen. Do you guys have an imagination of what that can be? I mean, flip the script. Imagine that would be you in that person's shoes. Someone else would be beating you to believe in an image. Would you guys like it? Of course not, right? So when you guys fall back to the history, you guys got to understand the reason why we're in the present is because of the history. And if we want to change at least a seed of mustard, we have to start in one ourselves, because ourselves are our own worst enemy. And if in our mentality, we're not controlling just because of someone else's color, way of thinking, different mentality, we can't judge them. We're no one to judge them. If we can't have the nerve to look at our own MIG, how can we judge anybody else when we got our own flaws to look at?
Thank you. I really appreciate your contribution, and I really appreciate it.
I have those notes that I wanted to ask. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood what I was trying to get to. Because the history of the daughters falls back to the 1600s, and it talks about a lot to do with the history and the religion beliefs, and it's all connected.
No, thank you so much for speaking up. I mean, I am Native American, like I said.
I have those.
We all have feelings of our own, I understand. And, I mean, being on this project, I speak for my family, my ancestors, that we are here today telling their stories so that we can realize and bring our culture back. And we want to share it. That's all it is we want to share and show you who we really are. And I thank you for that. So yes.
And it is a puzzle with
It
missing
is a puzzle,
pieces.
and so it's beautiful, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you. So I think just this one question of how long will we stay with this project? If not, what are the next steps? And so on, will there be more updates? So this is going to extend through the next academic year. Actually, just breaking news, got a new research assistant to join the project yesterday. And she's really good. I'm really happy. And so we're going to continue working with NAACP. We'll continue coming to the archives, and we're going to continue trying to substantiate our findings and flesh it out so that we have more complete history to tell. Yeah.
Definitely recommend it, guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any final words?
I think just, I'll make a final remark of just again, to underscore my gratitude to this audience and to that audience and to everybody who's involved in this. You know, we are really fighting for the future of our country, right? Which is only going to be possible by reckoning with the past. Like Jeremy said, you know, we have to can't forgive without reconciling, right? And so it's nice to see that there's this engaged community right here that is willing to reckon with the truth of the past. And one thing I should say, you know, we haven't actually outed a whole bunch of names yet because of sort of the phase of our research, but it is true that some of the leading families, so-called, of Sonoma County, I mean, obviously all of them, in fact, right? And so one, just because I live near Hohen Ave, we found Hohen with Indian girl in his house, right? You know, the Carrillos, tons of neighbors.
Mark West,
Mark
there
West,
is
yeah.
a Spanish movement in order to even get that land. So Mark Westland.
Yeah, so anyway, so there's lots more stories to tell, and I appreciate that you care about this past. And these students did a great job. Huh?
Thank you everyone for coming to today's talk, and thank you so much for your questions and your curiosity. Thank you again to the NAACP for providing digital access to this content today. It will be posted at some point on their YouTube channel, so please check that back. I also want to remind you that my colleagues on the side have some of the documents that were mentioned today. We have some of the primary resources, some of the census records, so you can actually take a look. The transcription that Juliana did is also there, so you can, you don't have to decipher the handwriting, it's there for you. And then my colleague Amy in the back has some resources if you'd like to check out more information and take that. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all. Bye.